Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. What I'd like to do tonight is simply talk about our feelings. And ladies and gentlemen, before I begin, I would like to share something common to every one of us who has ever breathed. Every one of us is going to go to his grave feeling guilty about our feelings. Every one of us. See if you don't recognize yourself somewhere here. I didn't love my mother as much as I should have. I didn't love my father as much as I should have. I wasn't as kind to my brothers and sisters as I should have been. I showed more sympathy to outsiders and strangers than to those I love, etc., 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 etc. We're all going to go to our graves feeling guilty about our feelings. I'd like to make a statement here. Feelings are neither moral nor immoral. They're there. They're just there. I am not morally responsible for a feeling unless I obviously cultivate it. What I am responsible for is the subsequent action. I can feel hostility if someone walks into a room. I'm not responsible for that. What is an emotion? It's a feeling that occurs inside of me as a result of some external stimulus brought about by a person, a place, a thing, a happening, an occurrence, an event, anything. It's like flipping a switch and a light goes on. It's a response to a stimulus. What I'm responsible for is what I do with it or what I allow it to do to me. So that morality enters into that aspect of it. I once heard a man make what I consider to be the most profound observation about emotions I've ever heard in my life. He said, emotions are what we have the most of and know the least about. And he was right. Tonight, what I would like to do is just make some personal observations like that about our feelings. I am not a psychologist, so you won't hear any technical language. But I only know what I've learned from listening to people like you. Would you notice how I've written this? Love is a basic emotion. It is over here. Hate, H-A-T-E, is at the other end of the swing of the pendulum. All other emotions are somewhere in between these two basics, these two four-letter words. Under love, we have all kinds of what we would call nice feelings. Satisfaction, peace, joy. Joy at the accomplishment or the happiness of another, which comes under sympathy, to feel with. Tolerance of others, forgiveness, joy, and so on and so forth. They all, I believe, result in and contribute to happiness. Watch hate. Under hate and all around hate are all of these so-called negative things that we're all familiar with. I won't read them all, but they're there. Self-pity, resentment, jealousy, intolerance, criticism, unforgiveness, guilt, sadness, depression, all of those things that we would call negative. I can be deeply affected by my emotions and by my feelings. But I would like to make this observation. Number one, I personally am responsible for my own happiness or unhappiness. Other people don't make me happy or make me unhappy. things and happenings don't make me happy or make me unhappy. What they do is they can affect my happiness or unhappiness. But ultimately, I have the control. I know that may sound a little bit wacky. What I'm trying to say is this, and I think it'll simplify it immensely. If I'm walking down the street and a friend of mine slaps my face, I will weep. I'll cry. My reaction? I'll be angry. I'll be surprised. I'll be sad. But ladies and gentlemen, if I'm crying 20 years from now, that's not my friend's fault, that's mine. An example that all the professionals use. It rains. One man is happy, one man is sad. The happy man is the farmer who's been waiting for it. The sad man wanted to golf and can't. The rain is the same. The happiness and the unhappiness occurs from the attitude towards it. And so it is here. Can people affect my happiness or not? Yes. Can rain affect my happiness or unhappiness? Of course. Can missing an airplane affect my happiness or unhappiness? That happens to me every now and then. Yes. But if I allow it to still have an effect on me 10 or 15 years from now, something's wrong with me. Something is wrong with me. Now, let's take a look at love and hate and find out why they are extremes, why one is there and one is there. Emotions in general are lumped into two kinds, good and bad. Now again, that has nothing to do with moral good or bad, just good or bad in another sense. We'll see it in a minute. Positive and negative, constructive and destructive. Let's look at them briefly and try to see why. I think the indication is given here. Love is in the middle, and all these things branch out from it. All of these things, I think, ultimately will help to develop, will indicate, will produce, and show happiness. The result, the inner result of soul of all these things we call negative and destructive simply because they result in unhappiness. Why? I think the reason it's so basic, it is so simple, it's the obvious that we miss. The essence of human happiness is the satisfaction that comes from commitment to others. One's own self-fulfillment is impossible without commitment to other people. Commitment to others means that you function for their well-being. Watch these emotions. They all go out to other people. You forgive others. You are satisfied for having done something for others. You are at peace with your God and yourself because of your commitment to others, etc., etc., etc. The result is simple happiness. Fulfillment. Watch these. I have written hate in a circle because it encompasses all of these things that are totally self-centered. I hurt, therefore I'm unhappy. I have been put upon, therefore I'm sad. I have been insulted, therefore I'm unhappy. I am depressed. I have done these horrible things, therefore I feel guilt and remorse, etc., 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 etc. Let's look at some of these things that we call negative and just examine them a little bit. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know that the great danger in all of this? There are some aspects of these things that are perfectly normal, natural, and justified. For instance, you're walking down the street and you see a boy torturing a little puppy. If you're not angry, something's wrong with you. That's justified anger. If a maniac or someone who is on drugs enters your living room waving a gun and you're not afraid, something is wrong with you. If someone steals, let's say an automobile that you have sweated for 3 years to pay for and you don't resent that, you're sick. And someone once said, what is love if there's no jealousy? Don't you see what I'm trying to say? A lot of these things are perfectly justified and are perfectly normal. And that, I believe, is their danger. That, I believe, is their danger. Here's an alcoholic who gets fired from his job. He obviously feels resentful and full of self-pity and so on. What he fails to see is that it was perfectly justified that they fire him because he wasn't producing. Now let's look at his wife. He beat her up 3 times in a month. Her resentment is perfectly justified. But suppose he gets sober and remains sober and does the job, and she keeps that hatred in her for the next 14 or 15 years. Righteous anger is like every gift of God. It's a two-edged sword. It produces a great deal of good. It produces a great deal that is natural. But by the very nature of the thing, it's dangerous. It's like dynamite. Dynamite is a marvelous thing. You can put a hole through a mountain to run a train through it. You can also put a hole through yourself if you're not careful of it. And that's what these things are all about. Ladies and gentlemen, either you handle them or they'll handle you. And that's not a threat, that's a promise. That's a promise. What is a resentment? There's a Latin word sentire, which means to feel, to sense. We have 5 senses. We see, we smell, we taste, we hear, and we touch. All right. Someone steps on your toe, you feel. Someone plays music, you hear. Someone paints a picture, you see, etc., etc. So you have a response to a stimulus. All right, supposing someone bounces a 2x4 off of the base of your skull, you feel. Supposing it was unjustified, and you go home and you keep thinking about that, and you keep going over it in your mind, and for the next 4 months you keep going over it, next time you see him, you shoot him. That is what we call a resentment. We feel again and again and again and again. And the danger is that some people gain a perverted sense of happiness from resenting. They give into a gigantic selfishness, self-pity. You know what is said of alcoholics about these 2 things? Resentment and self-pity are luxuries that the alcoholic can ill afford. They usually wind up in a drunk. They are completely self-destructive because they are self-centered. They are self-centered. How do these things manifest themselves? How can you tell, basically, how can you tell whether a person is happy or unhappy? All you have to do is listen. Do you want to know what anyone, do you want to know what you're like? What you are like? Have a friend on any given day that, you know, he doesn't tell you about. Just have a pact with him to tape everything that comes out of your mouth for an entire day. You will be stunned at what you hear. We find out what we're like from what we say and what we do. Answer this question very simply. Who are the people you like to be around, and who are the people that you run from when they come around? It's that simple. Selfish people reflected in their speech. You know what self-pity ultimately turns into? A can you top this of misery. Say, jeepers, I broke my hand last week. There's always some guy in the crowd. I broke both of mine 3 weeks ago. I had a gallstone removed. Jeepers, it was that big, I nearly died. Some clown always said, I had one that big, and I did die. You know, on and on. Can you top this? Some people become so used to that they are most miserable when they have nothing to be miserable about. Isn't that true? Isn't that true? Take some of the older people in your life, perhaps a relative or a friend. There are older people in the lives of everyone, particularly little kids who love their grandparents. Just think of some particular older person in your life whom you love. Why do you love him or her? Why do you like being around him or her? Why do you want to be around him or her? I'll bet you $1,000 to an empty peanut shells for the simplest reason on earth. You never hear them gripe. They're cheerful people, they're happy people, and it reflects itself, and you like to be with happy people. I once was chaplain at a convent of nuns. And after Mass and breakfast every morning, I used to go up to the infirmary to the old nuns who were there literally to die. There was one nun there that always gave me a little mini retreat. She was blind, not born blind. She had the gift of sight and lost it. She had a bad heart and she was diabetic, among other things. And she always had a joke. Always had a joke. I loved being around her. And there was another dear old soul, God bless her. Ask her how she was, and she told you. Usually took 15 to 18 minutes to tell you. It was always negative. I'm not condemning her for that. I'm telling you what kind of person she was. She was a person who, the only thing I can conclude is, as a result of giving in to literally self-centered feelings, that's all she had to talk about. That's all she had to talk about, her aches and pains. And the other person almost denied them. She simply was happy and shared that. Be careful what you ask for. You're liable to get it, and you may not want it. I knew a woman who wanted her husband to stay home with her and pay more attention to her. And her doctor said, it would be nice if he would want that and stay home. But suppose you could force him to stay home with you and he did it unhappy. What would you have gained? What would you have gained? This is the great cry of many married women. He'd rather be here, he'd rather be there, he's anywhere but home. What would you gain if you forced somebody to do something against his will? There's a marvelous story that illustrates that. There is a very dear old lady. She is 92 years old. All her life, she wanted to get a singing telegram. And at age 92, one afternoon, doorbell rang. She opened it up. Here's a kid in a Western Union suit. And he said, I have a telegram for you. And she began to quiver. She is so excited. She said, oh, is it a singing telegram? And he said, no, lady, not this one. Oh, she says, all my life I've wanted a singing telegram, and you come. She says, I'm so old, I know I'll never get another one. Please sing it. And he says, lady, I can't sing this one. Oh, please. And she bribed him $50, so he just shrugged. He says, okay, lady. Da-da-da-da-da-da, your sister Rose is dead. So, you be very careful what you ask for. Now we come to the real killer, depression. I think that the feeling of depression is a kind of a total sadness that just completely engulfs the soul of the one who has it. Some professionals call it frozen anger. I call it frozen self-pity. All of the attention and energies of soul are inward bent. It is self-centeredness complete. I believe that one of the gravest mistakes made against the person who has it is treating him or her with medication. I think that is absolutely destructive. I know for a fact that if you are depressed long enough and you take tranquilizers long enough, the medication will deepen and actually produce the very depression that it is given to try to alleviate. That is one of the paradoxes of life. My friends, now we get to the burden of what I would like to say tonight. Is there any way of changing hatred into love? Is there any way of changing unforgiveness to forgiveness? Is there any way of changing nagging into praising? Is there any way of changing griping into happy talk? I think there are means that the good Lord has put at our disposal that we can use to improve ourselves. I'd like to share them with you. I do believe that in time, We can beg God to be made, as Francis of Assisi said, instruments of His peace. Where there is hatred, we can show love. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. We can indeed bring happiness to others if we learn how to be happy ourselves. Not by doing away with negative emotions. We're going to have these things. We're going to have them till we die. I maintain that we can work on them so that we, in one sense, can control them rather than let them control us. How? Through a threefold agency. God, others, and self. I'd like to make a comment here about God. You don't see it in many textbooks. I don't know why, but you don't. But I feel this strongly. Every one of us in this room loves and is loved. And there are those who love us almost as much as we love ourselves. There are those that we love almost as much as we love ourselves. And there are people indeed with whom we can share our hearts, our minds, and our souls. But my friends, every one of us has discovered this, and if you haven't, you will. There comes a time, or times, in the life of every human being when no one can understand him or her fully at all. And it is at these times when the heart screams for understanding that the only place we can get it is from the God who created that heart. And we go to Him. He built us that way. What does He give in return? The strength and the power to do what needs to be done. And that is pretty much all that God does, because He wants us to use the natural means to the end. Too many people in their prayers beg for and expect the miraculous. That's unnatural. God is capable of the miraculous, but He doesn't always use it. For example, when this is all over, you could be wafted home to your trundle beds by an act of God's will, but I don't believe He's going to do it. I think He wants you to drive home the way you came. And I think He functions that way in the rest of life. I have heard people say, perhaps you've heard this too, well, my life is a little bit unmanageable. I think I'd better get out of the driver's seat and let God take over. Do, and you'll have a crash. God is no more about to come down and simply run your life than He came down and cooked your breakfast this morning. You know what God gives drivers? Maps. He puts the means at our disposal. We're the ones to use the means. God supplies the strength to use them. And so we go to God and we ask Him, let's say, for the serenity to accept what we can't change. There are those of you who are alcoholics. You either accept that or you'll die. Some people are blind. They cannot change that. What they need is whatever it takes inside simply to accept that as a fact of life. You may be married to an alcoholic. You either accept that or you don't. From God, we get the power, the strength, the drive, whatever it is, to accept life. We also get from Him the courage to change the things we're capable of changing. And if we work at it hard enough, He's liable to give us the wisdom to know the difference between those two. Now please, once you acknowledge the fact that you do indeed need the strength of God to do everything else that needs to be done, now let's get down to the practical business of using the natural means that He puts at our disposal. Every spiritual writer, every single one, In speaking of the spiritual life, where there is such a thin line between sanity and insanity, demanded that we have spiritual guidance, a spiritual director. And it is all based on a simple, one of the most fundamental facts of human nature: no one is judge in his own case. Good heavens, ladies and gentlemen, do you know the repercussions if we were? If I were judge in my own case, I wouldn't need you, and you wouldn't need me. But we're built differently. No one is judge in his own case, and I do need you, and you do need me. We need others. And that runs contrary to the wacky modern idea of let it all hang out. I've seen people let it all hang out in an uncontrolled, infantile way and absolutely step on and hurt the sensitivities of a whole lot of other people. That is garbage. There should be a proper place and a proper person to whom I can let it all hang out. For several reasons, I must have somebody particular. Yes, I do need a steam valve, because if I go to this person and properly ventilate my anger, it's like letting steam go into the air. But very often when I'm caught up in the passion of anger, if I were to ventilate it to the person who caused that anger, I might wipe him out in a completely unbalanced, unjust way. This is why I must have someone who understands me that I can go to and ventilate. But another reason, so that I can gain from his advice. My friends, please, one of the greatest evils in the lives of counselors, you find counselors come up and they ask you this or that question, or they're disturbed, or they're suffering burnout and so on. I ask one question of counselors: do you have a counselor? And the answer is inevitably, geez, I never thought of that. I'm too busy guiding other people's lives. I'm a guide. I don't need direction. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And this is the danger of any professional. Priest, counselor, lawyer, doctor. Some of the sickest of the sick can be the best guides of all. I need to follow the advice of my guide. You need someone in whose judgment you have supreme confidence. They tell a marvelous story of a fellow over in Bavaria, I think. Right outside of his back door was the highest mountain in the country, and all his life he dreamed of climbing the mountain. Age 47, he woke up one morning and said, today's the day, I'm going to climb it. And he did, right up to the top. And it was about 20 minutes of 6 that evening. The sun was setting, and he had reached his goal. And he was so happy, he just threw his arms out in great elation. He says, thank God. Woo! He lost his grip. Down the side of the mountain, he's singing, see. Out of the side of his eye, he sees a branch growing out of the mountain, and he grabbed it, nearly ripped his arm off. Oh, the pain was excruciating. And his eyes were shut and his teeth were clenched, and after about 20 minutes, when the pain began to subside, he took a reading. There was nothing up, nothing down, nothing on either side. There wasn't even a fingernail grip. The need was there. All right? So he looked up into the vast expanse of blue and he said, anybody up there? And the voice came back immediately and said, yes, Henry, this is the Lord. You want out from that predicament. Follow these simple instructions. Number one, let go of that branch. Thought about it for a minute, lifted his eyes up. He said, anybody else up there? So, if you're going to get a guide, follow directions. Follow directions. Let me share a few things about the proper following of directions, because, ladies and gentlemen, see, the insidious part of these negative emotions is that they can grow and fester so gradually that you're unaware of the grip that they have on you, completely unaware. How many of you in this room have gone to a psychiatrist and say, he didn't help me? You know why? You expected him to do the work that was yours. Doctors don't get you well. They prescribe what you ought to do to get well. You have to do the doing. Psychiatrists can only suggest. You have to follow the suggestion. God doesn't do things for you. He gives you the strength. You do the doing. Sure, faith can move mountains. Bring a shovel. As you've heard me say so many times, can prayer help with a toothache? Of course, if said on the way to the dentist's office. You see, God gave us the science of dentistry to handle bad teeth, just like He gave us the science of medicine to handle sick bodies. He wants us to take the natural means to the end. The psychiatrist, the psychologist, the doctor, the priest, they don't get you well, they make the suggestions. Yes, they're experts in their line, but they prescribe. You fill the prescription and you take the medicine. Case of a person who went to a psychiatrist. And it's a paradox. He's a beautiful man, psychiatrist. He's also an alcoholic. He's a very unhappy man. He's a genius at helping other people, but he's still drinking. Sadly enough, he's one of those people we all love so much. We'd give our arms to see him sober, but no one has been able to press that right button to which he can respond. Anyway, lady went to see him one time with all kinds of problems. She was unhappy, for example, because the man she had given herself to completely and totally in marriage was now getting drunk and calling her pretty dirty names. You know how the psychiatrist handled that? The most normal, beautiful way of all. He didn't probe into the man's childhood or the woman's childhood. He said, "He called you a whore." She said, "Yes," in tears. He said, "Are you one?" She said, "Of course not." He said, "Does calling you one make you one?" She said, "No." He said, "Would you be so upset if he called you a chair?" She said, "No." He said, "Why are you so upset at this? Doesn't it occur to you that perhaps he has a problem?" "I need help. I am recovering from alcoholism, and my husband won't give me any help. He drinks in front of me and has drinking friends around." He says, "If he has a drinking problem, you are expecting the impossible. How can he help carry you if he has no legs? Would you expect a lame person to carry you?" And then he got on the business of the griping and the complaining. He asked an obvious question. Please listen to it, ladies and gentlemen, because it's a thing that plagues all of us. We're all griped and we all nag at things that other people either are or aren't doing that irritate us. He asked the most simple question that could be asked. He says, "Does it work?" She said, "No." He said, "Why nag?" She said, "Oh." If it's not working, don't use it. If it's not working, don't use it. And then he gave her a clue as to what to do. He said, "You know as well as I do that no human being is 1,000% wrong." He said, "I'm going to make a suggestion to you if you're big enough to do it." She said, "What's that?" He said, "Pick out one of his good points and play up to it. Praise him for it." Ladies and gentlemen, 99% of us are unwilling to do that. We're just unwilling to do that. It's too unjust. I'm the martyr in my house, and I'm not about to praise that. I don't know what to say. I'm not about to praise him for something. Only big people can do that. Only people who truly want to be happy and know that they have to work for it and nobody else can bring it to them. Nobody else can bring it to them. All kinds of suggestions that took work and effort for self-fulfillment. That woman is a happy woman today. She has found happiness by commitment to others. The only way you're going to change anyone else is to first of all change yourself and inspire another to change self. Now, what is it we have to do? All the work. All the work. There isn't a soul on earth going to do this for you. Not a soul on earth do this for you. Now, you want to know what you've gotten out of this talk this evening? Be honest about this, and I'm dead serious. Don't put your hands up, but answer this question honestly. How many of you have sat here listening to all this stuff about commitment to others and loving and getting rid of all this negative stuff? How many of you in this room have thought, God, I hope my wife is listening to this? Oh, I hope my husband is getting an earful. Oh, I wish so-and-so were here. I'm doing that now. There are a few people I wish could hear all of this. Did you ever sit in church on Sunday and listen to a sermon? You know, they're talking about the good guys and the bad guys, the mustard seed, some fell on good ground, some fell... I'm the one that falls on the good ground. All the rest of you are those, you know. I always look on myself as the good one. The wasted hours. Answer this one honestly, if you will. How many waking hours of your day do you spend making up speeches of comeuppance for somebody? How many of you were rehearsing a speech tonight as you came here? Well, when I get home tonight, I'll just wait, and when he says this, I'm going to say something. We use much of our mental and spiritual energies in that. Can hate be changed into love? Yes. Can unforgiveness become forgiveness? Yes. Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. Remember when we spoke of the danger of the justified anger? Now, you can either hug that to yourself and go to your grave hating, or you can get rid of it and be happy. But the job has to be done by you. The job has to be done by you. The sadness of people who have so ingrained negative feelings in their soul, they're not about to want to give them up. Those feelings are too precious. And when Bill Wilson said they are luxuries, he meant that. They are luxuries that a lot of people don't want to give up. Because here's a wife who says, he did send our 15-year-old out of the house. He did beat me regularly for years. And very, very often it's sometimes impossible to get rid of those feelings. The feelings, ladies and gentlemen, in the hearts and the souls of children who have been damaged by alcoholic parents. Very often that hatred just goes on and on and on and affects their own life, and they in turn pass it on to their children. This is a very real thing. Let's go back to this woman. There were some injustices done to her. She said, I want to go back to my husband. I said, do you love him? She said, I honestly don't know. She was very honest about it. I said, why do you want to go back? She said, for the sake of my children, I want them to have a home. I said, can you forgive completely? Because if you go back into that house retaining any unforgiveness in your soul, it will destroy you. It will destroy you. She accepted that and worked on it. She did the work and got the job done. Ladies and gentlemen, pain is one of the most paradoxical things that God has allowed on this earth. You either use it or it'll use you. And the idea of life and living is not to be without pain. To live is to hurt. The idea is to use pain properly or it'll use you. Can it be used? Can emotional pain, that's the worst kind, emotional pain. Can that be used constructively? You bet it can. Let me share something else with you about a POW. His name is Colonel Bobby Bagley, and the greatest and most wonderful thing I can say about him is that he is a friend to me. I met him in Karamürsel, Turkey. He had come back after 7 years of prison in North Vietnam, and he was the commanding officer of an Air Force base over there. And I spent about an hour to an hour and a half in his office, open-mouthed, listening to him talk. And he said, as perhaps any normal, ordinary man would say, he said, you know, Father, I'm not a deeply religious man. But he said, prison changed me. He said, I came to my present relationship with God in prison. He spent 2 years of his life in solitary confinement before other prisoners were allowed in his presence. But he said, you know, in those 2 years, he said, I came to my present relationship with God through the creatures that he allowed me to have for company. The bugs, the flies, the vermin. And he said, you know, as time went by, he said, I developed a beautiful relationship with a mother rat. He said, you know, Father, most people believe rats are dirty. But he said, this lady was blind. She had only 3 legs, but she raised 3 children. And I learned how to live from her. He said she never once, and he used these words, he said she never once gave in to self-pity or resentment. She knew she had 3 children to raise, and she raised them. He said, I watched her grope her way out of that cell looking for food for her babies, so I took to sharing my food with her. And you should have heard about their little bitty dab of rice twice a day for 7 years. But he said, you know, listen to this. On the days that they would torture him and throw him back in his cell, he said, waiting on the floor was his little bowl of swill. Never once did the mother rat go near it, and she wouldn't let her babies go near it until he had retrieved what was edible, and then he shared with them. But he said, you know, even in prison, things change. The inevitable happened. The babies grew up and left. And so did she. And this 50-year-old intelligent fighter pilot said this. He said, Father, I was devastated. My best friend on earth was gone. And then he said probably the most profoundly moving words I have ever heard in my entire life. He said, do you know how much God loved me? When that rat became pregnant again, she came back to my cell to have her new babies. You're angry? Self-pity? Feel sorry? Sad? Remorse? Grief? You've lost someone? What is there to say? What is there to say? Happiness is not the absence of pain. I believe that man became great because of the way he handled pain. I believe he has the soul of a saint. I believe now that I would just like to close by reminding you of a few very brief words that many of you have said hundreds, perhaps even thousands of times in your life. Many people use this as a prayer, and I'm going to ask you now just to listen to the words. God, grant me the serenity, the peace of soul to accept the things I cannot change, other people. And it is a waste of my time and my spiritual energies to try to change others. God, grant me the courage to change the things I can, all of the stupid negative things in my own soul. And God, grant me the wisdom to know the difference between those two. I want to thank you for being here. I thank you for listening to me. And as a result of many years of great happiness, I want to thank you for more than you'll ever know.